Suddenly, a sloth crosses the street. An interview with the choreographer Céline Bellut about her work. Céline, in short, what is Suddenly a Sloth Crosses the Street about?
Suddenly a Sloth Crosses the Street is a movement performance in 4 acts dealing with the topic of disobedience from 4 various perspectives. Through the work, we reflect on the consumerism of entertainment and we criticize a society that promotes obedient and virtuoso performing bodies. The work is conceptual, but the visual and the sensorial aspect of the work are really important and primordial for us.
If you had to describe the performance in one sentence, what would it be?
To describe the performance in one sentence, I would say it is conceptual, visual, and confusing movement performance.
How did the idea for the performance come about?
Suddenly a Sloth Crosses the Street is the second performance of a trilogy that I started in 2021 with performances along Quiet River. And this trilogy is a bit of a reflection on my own creative process and is strongly inspired by a book that I read in 2019 by Vladimir Yankelevich. It's an essay on the perception of time called L'aventure, l'ennui, le sérieux. So adventure, boredom, and seriousness. And it struck me quite strongly that those three notions of time are what I consider the base of my creative process. So knowing the adventure, the boredom, and seriousness. So therefore, I got the wish to investigate a bit more precisely on those three concepts. So in 2021, with a performance along Quiet River, we investigated the notion of boredom. And now with Suddenly a Sloth Crosses the Street, we investigated on the idea of adventure. And then I questioned myself, what do I understand in this term of adventure and how can it relate more to my creative process? And pretty strongly, it came to me that adventure is a lot about taking risk, and taking risk is a lot about disobeying. So I got interested in this notion of disobedience and in questioning how we could embody, first of all, this notion and how we could create a movement research and an improvisation research based on this notion of disobedience. So in 2022, I invited Jordan Gigou and Inyu Chen as dancers, as well as Peter Haas and Alexander Ernst as dramaturge, to research with me together on this idea of disobedience and on how we could create an improvisation technique based on this notion. So we created physical disobedience, and then after this amazing research, we together decided to go for a production and to get or like to understand this notion of disobedience in a larger sense. So not only about physical practices, but also trying to reflect more on how humans interact with their behavior, with their surrounding. Pardon. And so the idea of also creating the piece in 4 acts came along.
Is there a tension in creating a choreography for the dancers to follow that is dedicated to disobedience?
Yes, of course. I mean, creating a choreography that is to be repeated many times on the topic of disobedience is a bit of an impossible task. But somehow we are not aiming or we are not claiming to do a choreography that is disobedient. We are taking the topic of disobedience in order to approach certain physicality and certain images and certain actions on stage. But for sure, this having to create this piece also asked from me personally as a choreographer, but also like from Jordan and In as performers, a lot of letting go, in the sense of we are really much busy with our own physicality and with the many improvisation tasks that are like that we are following through the work, but we are not trying to control the outcome. So like somehow we are really much trying to feel from the inside what happens, and then the final result is a bit out of our hands because it's a lot of improvisation. Like at more or less half of the work is improvisation. So it means that we are not able to really control what happens. And as a choreographer, I'm really not able to control what happens. And it's also not something that I'm interested in, particularly with this idea of disobedience, because it has a lot to do with letting go and just see and welcome whatever happens without having to, or like without trying to control it. So I think this is how we deal with it, mainly by trying to let it go of the choreography control. Yeah, a bit difficult question to answer.
Why did you decide to divide the performance into 4 acts?
So as I said, we got more interested in investigating the idea of disobedience in a larger sense, and not only as performers and not only as humans. So yeah, came the idea of taking like 4 different perspectives on this idea of disobedience. The first perspective is the first act called humans, and this act is really much on physical practice as performers and on trying to trick our own patterns and our own social behaviors. So trying to see how we can disobey our own impulsion in order to go further in the creative process and not only constantly repeating a same pattern of creation. Then the second act, called nurture, is a research on wild animal and how certain animal has been educated and learned to obey humans in order to entertain them. So we focused on certain animal from circus and trying to study the physicality and how the fact of obeying to a certain authority of human had modified or changed the physicality of those animals. So it's more also a critique of entertainment policy and of of circus, and like how human had trained wildness in order to entertain. Then the third act, called nature. So this third act is more of a reflection on the idea of gazing, because for me, obedience and disobedience has a lot to do with gazing, because I understand the fact of obeying implies obeying to an authority, and in this case, the authority being the human, so the human gaze. And we got interested on how, in general, human gaze certain wildlife in order to later imply authority on this human life in order to make them obey. So with this reflection of gazing, we decided to work with the media of animal documentary. So this third act is an animal documentary on sloths. And then the question, why of sloths? So sloths are, for me, an extraordinary animal, and it's quite interesting that we took this animal because it's for me it's a bit of a counterpoint with the rest of the piece, where in the rest of the piece we criticize the idea of entertainment and the idea of productivity. So of like how we human by trying to make the rest of the wildlife obey, we try to make the wildlife productive for humans. And by investigating on sloths, we realized that actually this animal took a bit of a counter direction in evolution. While we human kind of went through evolution by becoming stronger and stronger and like more effective and like more able to produce and to consume in order to produce more, the sloths went in another direction. So like at the beginning, like the sloths were actually enormous animal like the size of mammoths, but through evolution it became smaller and smaller and became slower and slower. So in our days, the sloths are the slowest mammal on Earth, and they consume only 3 leaves per day. So they are extremely self-sufficient, and they are, for me, like the perfect metaphor to the idea of ingrowth. So like to degrowth, to like stop consuming more and to do like less and less in order to be more self-sufficient. So therefore, we took this metaphor of the sloth, and you will see through the piece with this 9-minute documentary that this animal is actually absolutely extraordinary, and the way they interact with their surrounding is completely self-sufficient and is a perfect counterexample to how we human created our society in something like that's it's more and more energy. So the fourth and last act of the piece, called Culture, is a re-embodiment of Prélude à l'après-midi d'un faune. So we are performing on the music from Claude Debussy, and we also investigated a bit the movement quality, or like the choreography, from this famous solo from Václav Nijinsky that he did in 1913. Yeah, this work was particularly important, or like interesting for us in terms of obedience and disobedience, because somehow what happened in the Prélude à l'après-midi d'un faune, like first of all in the poem from Stéphane Mallarmé, but then later also in the solo from Václav Nijinsky, is the awakening, like the sensual and the sexual awakening of the faune. So it reflects a lot on impulses, or like on inner impulses, of like sexual impulses. And somehow we found it interesting to reflect also on how in our society, or like how in our daily life, we have to deal with the fact of having sometimes to disobey, or sometimes let those sensual drive guide us. So somehow in this last part, we are more in an idea of letting our inner impulses and our gut drive us through the music and through the work, to kind of conclude the piece in a more exploration of freedom and of sensual drives guiding us. And of course, it is an homage to Václav Nijinsky, and to, in general, other choreographer that had to disobey establishment in dance history, and because, or like thanks to their disobedience, they made dance involve, or like they made art involve in general.
Was there a particular moment in the creation of the performance that stuck in your mind?
I mean, generally, this creation was really beautiful. We had a lot of really intimate and personal moments of improvisation, because it's such a personal topic. So there is many moments that I remember really strongly. If I have to name one in particular, it would be in 2022, when we were in the first phase of research. And I was for 3 days alone in studio with Jordan, and we did a lot of improvisation on more like on the physicality of disobedience, and on trying to also reflect on the power relationship between the dancer and the choreographer. And somehow our main question was like, how can we as performer, or like as dancer, be free in a dance improvisation that is being framed by someone else? So like how we can take those rules and not be blindly obeying the rule, but somehow try to see how we can also disobey this rule to get more free. I mean, it was quite a like open question, and it was really interesting moment. But there is one moment in particular where I asked Jordan for music that resonated with him in terms of his own dance history, or like his own path as a dancer. And he actually came with the idea of using Prélude à l'après-midi d'un faune from Debussy. So yeah, so then I just put the music and let Jordan improvise for the first time on this song. And I don't know how to say it. It was just a really beautiful moment where I, on one hand, felt that I did not recognize Jordan in his physicality, even though we know each other for 10 years. Because I felt like he was almost not human anymore. He completely embodied this phone, and it became a kind of creature that following his own drives, and it was just, yeah, I don't know how to explain it. It was just a beautiful dance moment, beautiful exchange, and yeah, this moment stuck particularly in my mind. And this is why also after this improvisation, I decided to investigate a bit more on the work of Prélude à l'après-midi d'une forme, and then later on, it came into the piece.
What would you like the audience to take away from the performance?
That quite of a difficult question because I'm not thinking so much that way when I produce. I mean, of course, there is a strong emphasis on what could the audience experiment, and of course there is in this sense an idea of manipulation in the way that I structure the piece, so that of course there's moments which are supposed to be uncomfortable, moments which are supposed to be more light or more funny. So like there's like a structure, like a choreography structure in the how the audience should feel or could feel through the work. But I would not formulate it as I want them to take something particularly from the work. I mean, I feel more that through this work we are asking a lot of question, or like we are raising a lot of question or like of problematics, and then at the end each audience member feel in their own way. I mean, everybody, we are all different, so we all have like different interpretation on the same picture or like on the same moment. So I don't want them to do anything in particular. I just wish that they could enter the work and let themselves be guided through like the different emotions that we're proposing, to say it really simply.